So I guess, obviously it was 1965, Lyndon Johnson's government that started talking about the effects of climate on people's health and to try to mitigate it. Then it was in the 70s, it was a Republican President Nixon who created the EPA. So it really has had a bipartisan kind of history. What is the impact on individual health, do you think, if this is allowed to continue with this current Republican MAGA president, given what you've just said is underway?
Well, I think the biggest impact on human health from this problem is not directly the result of climate change, but the result of what we do to make climate warm, which is to say burn fossil fuels. That produces air pollution that kills globally perhaps 5 million, perhaps 10 million people every single year. And in the US, estimates run as high as 350,000 people a year, which is to say as many Americans may have died in 2020 from the effects of air pollution produced from the burning of fossil fuels as died from COVID in that first pandemic year. And that is not an exceptional year. These statistics, the modeling suggests that we are doing that in an ongoing way, which means the direct health consequences of leaning into a fossil fuel near-term future are quite grim and devastating. There are other effects too. There are effects on heat mortality. There are effects on infectious disease. You can go down the line. I think, unfortunately, we've trained ourselves to look away from these consequences and think of the system that we have today built around fossil fuels as a kind of a neutral status quo. But it isn't. It's killing many Americans every year. And if we were in a greener, cleaner future, we would be killing many fewer of them. That's true not just in the US, it's true around the world. But in the US, I think it's particularly grotesque, given that we are such a rich country. We are so well endowed with public land. We don't need to worry about land use issues. We have an opportunity here, and indeed the Biden administration was trying to engineer a kind of a revolution in energy production that would have brought us at least into league with our great geopolitical rival, China. And in fact, the Trump administration is just shooting ourselves in the foot, cutting off that project at the start. And I think ultimately, when we pull back from the question of human health to the flourishing of human societies, we should be really ashamed to see the great lead that China has taken over the last few years. 10 years ago, climate diplomats would have said China was a climate problem. And now it's U.S., the petrostate, that is really the global climate problem.
And of course, China, as you say, is making a massive headways in this, particularly with EVs, the replacement of dirty emitters. You wrote that book, The Uninhabitable Earth, and I interviewed you in 2019 when you published it. And your first line is obviously poignant today. It is worse, much worse than you think. You acknowledge that you might have come off as alarmist then. You write, fair enough, because I am alarmed. So 6 years later, what is the scale of uninhabitable and alarm?
Well, I think a lot of that answer for me has to do with my own personal journey and, bouncing around through new science and getting quite alarmed and then kind of readjusting and taking a new assessment of the landscape. I would say personally, I'm less scared of the future that we're heading into, but more depressed, because I think that we are doing not nearly enough to limit warming, and maybe more conspicuously, not doing nearly enough to adapt to the future that we know is coming. I think you see the impact there when you think about the Texas floods, the tragic Texas floods, and maybe most dramatically when you think about the horrible fires that swept through Los Angeles Palisades and Altadena just 6 months ago, destroying whole neighborhoods in some of the richest, most well-connected parts of the world. And yet, these are stories that we have already moved on from and are treating as background noise and wallpaper. I think we're seeing that pattern play out more and more in the future. We are not just not mitigating climate change sufficiently, we are adapting to that new future primarily by normalizing a level of disaster that a few years ago we were horrified by, I was horrified by, but now seem like just more daily news that we can move on past and ignore.
I know, that is really the challenge, and it's unbelievable to think, because just a few years ago with the Greta Thunberg movement, there was such awareness. Just quickly, why are you less scared if you're more depressed?
I've started to see this as more continuous with a pattern of human history where there's more suffering than needs to be, more suffering than we should conscience as people of good conscience, and yet a world in which we will navigate thinking that it's relatively normal. It's a kind of an indictment of our moral imagination that we can look around at something like the Texas floods and see it as no big deal. And yet the fact that we are seeing it as no big deal tells us something about how we will live in the future world, one pockmarked by more disaster and considerably more suffering than was necessary, and yet one in which most people will probably live their lives thinking looking around and thinking everything's kind of fine. That's the role of the alarm raiser, is to say, let's not accept that. Let's try to fight for a better future. But I do think that the evolving geopolitics show us an unfortunate next few decades in which we see many more disasters, and yet we put climate on the back burner rather than the front burner.
Well, you keep raising the alarm and we'll keep talking to you. David Wallace Wells, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks for having me.